Thank you, Pastor Mike, as well as Ray, and this whole fellowship. I mean, what an incredible, unique charism you all carry. I was here a few years ago at the fellowship gathering, and I just remember going home to my wife and just gushing about the kind and the texture of the ways in which you all are following Jesus together as a community and longing for renewal in the church. And so I'm so honored to be here. Part of me feels a bit of imposter syndrome being up here because really many of you are my heroes in the ways that you have served in ministry and have sought to do so in a manner of health and discipleship and mission and passing things on to the next generation. So really, truly, I do salute you in many ways. So thank you so much. What an honor it is to be here with you. As Mike mentioned, I'm actually a local church pastor right in the heart of Manhattan of a church called Hope Church NYC, which is a church that we started about 10 years ago in Manhattan. We've got 3 locations in Manhattan, and we also started a very kind of a church plant network called the New City Network. And in addition to that, I'm also the president of the organization that Mike mentioned called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, which I'll share with you in a moment about kind of my own journey into how did I come into emotionally healthy discipleship. Now, I say all this to say, my name is Drew, and I'm a workaholic. And you'll hear probably a little bit more about that. So here's what's gonna happen tonight, especially for this pre-conference portion. I'm gonna share a bit of my own story, as well as for each one of us to take a bit of a personal inventory for ourselves. And if you're here with a spouse, you can also take an inventory perhaps with your spouse. And then have some discussion around it, and then kind of end with some time of questions and answers of wrestling through some of the issues that we're gonna be talking about tonight. And then tomorrow morning, we'll be talking about really kind of this one formative tool, which Mike mentioned, crafting a rule of life. And I'm gonna share about how we go about helping train other pastors and leaders craft a rule of life. You're gonna get an opportunity to see my own rule of life, and then you're gonna have an opportunity to kind of workshop some things for yourself. Now, if you're someone who perhaps you've already worked on a rule of life, and you've already crafted something for yourself, well, it's always a good practice to keep revisiting and examining, as David talks about, to allow God to search us and know us. And so by the end of tomorrow morning's session, you will have come out with hopefully a rule of life. We'll have a handout for you that you can work towards, especially as it relates to how you're gonna be with God in the midst of doing ministry for God. So with that said, I thought I'd actually start by, this passage is one that really animates me, I think, as a follower of Jesus and as a minister. John chapter 14, verse 12. Very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me, and of course, this is Jesus praying before his death, whoever believes in me will do the works I've been doing, and they will do even greater things than these. Can I hear you say greater things? Isn't that extraordinary? He says, greater things than these because I am going to the Father. Now, Jesus, if you imagine everything that Jesus has done, especially in the Gospel of John, raising Lazarus from the dead, opening the eyes of the blind, feeding the 5,000, teaching with incredible authority, like Jesus has done so many incredible things. And the reason why I am often gravitating towards this passage is because I'm like, there's a part of me that honestly, I get swelled with pride and anticipation and expectancy. We're gonna do greater things. A part of me is both kind of scared and frightened by it, but a part of me is excited about all the possibilities therein. Jesus says, you will do greater things than these, which is just absolutely extraordinary. If you imagine even us in this room, to even imagine, what would it look like for us? Isn't that what we long for in our congregations? The ministry of Jesus, the power of the Spirit alive, healings happening, transformation happening, families coming back and being reunited, sons and daughters and turning back to their fathers and mothers. All the miracles, isn't this what we long for? Now, here's what's interesting, because this is not a surprise to you, but Jesus actually gives the antidote for how in the world are we supposed to do this? Because, if this is what we long for, then really what is it? Jesus says, well, John 15:5, you've probably preached on this several times. You probably even have memorized this by heart. Jesus actually says, just a few verses later, he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will, not you might, not you could, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. High five your neighbor and say, apart from God, you can do nothing. That's right. Yeah. I mean, this tracks. I'm not a heretic just yet, right? Like, you're like, okay, that's right, yeah. Apart from God, we can do nothing. Now, here's what's puzzling for me though, right? Because Jesus says this phrase, apart from me, you can do nothing. But surely, Jesus, come on, there are some things that we can do without God. When you say apart from me, you can do nothing, I mean, how does this coincide with another teaching that Jesus gives? And you probably are familiar with this passage as well from Matthew chapter 7, because look at what Jesus says here. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, these are some sobering words. Could you imagine? This is what Jesus is saying. Now, how does this coincide? Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. But here in another passage, he actually says, actually, some of you can do a lot of things. In fact, you can prophesy in my name. You can do miracles. You can heal people. You can do extraordinary things in my name. And yet I will say to you, apart from me, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, you know what's crazy is that Jesus actually gives this teaching and this warning. But what's so extraordinary, it doesn't take very long for this actually to be lived out. Check out what happens in the birth of the church in the book of Acts. And you probably know this story as well. From Acts chapter 19. Look at what it says. It says, God did extraordinary miracles through Paul, so that even handkerchiefs and aprons that had touched him were taken to the sick, and their illnesses were cured, and the evil spirits left them. I mean, isn't that what we long for? That kind of oneness with God. That someone could, just the handkerchiefs, that someone could just touch them and be taken to the sick and people be healed. But notice, right? Paul is so dripping with oneness with God, such incredible power in his presence, that look at what happens. Some Jews who went around driving out evil spirits tried to invoke the name of the Lord Jesus over those who were demon possessed. I mean, they were like, oh my goodness, this power is real and sensational. Now look at what happens. They would say, in the name of the Jesus whom Paul preaches, I command you to come out. And it was working to some degree. But look at what happened. 7 sons of Sceva, a Jewish chief priest, were doing this. One day, the evil spirit answered them. Jesus I know, and Paul I know about, but who are you? Oh, snap. Then the man who had the evil spirit jumped on them and overpowered them all. He gave them such a beating that they ran out of the house naked and bleeding. Now, isn't that interesting? Jesus had given this warning. He says, actually, people will come in my name and say, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not do healings in your name? Did we not preach tremendous sermons, build great churches, have wonderful buildings with beautiful music emanating from them? Did we not reach people and build and church plant and do all of these things in your name? And Jesus actually says, actually, apart from me, I never knew you. Now, here's what's incredibly sobering about this message. Here's what Jesus is basically revealing, that it's possible to actually do ministry for God without God. It's possible to even invoke the name of Jesus to cast out evil spirits, to even heal the sick, Jesus says, and to prophesy. And for Jesus to say, actually, you have done this, but you've done it apart from me. Now that's incredibly sobering, especially as pastors and leaders. Yeah, I remember Francis Chan, he actually gave this one illustration about how he said, he remembers going to this one kind of, those theme parks where they have these pools and they have those wave pools. And what happens is the theme park isn't open yet, but when the theme park opens, the operator comes and basically turns on the wave pool. And then it creates these waves for the kids to play in, and people flock to this wave pool. And the thing about the wave pool, it's actually so easy to predict how high the waves are gonna go because it's machine operated. And it's basically been calibrated to a certain height. And he said that most times, often ministry feels like that, doesn't it? Like we've kind of learned techniques, we've gone to seminary or whatever institution of training. We've come to gatherings like this to perhaps maybe learn maybe some other things that we're gonna take back to our ministry so that we can somehow manufacture the wave. And then what we miss out on is the power and the fury of the real thing. The kind of waves that are created in the deep blue ocean. Isn't it easy to get so automated in the way that we go about doing ministry? It's so easy to do ministry for God without God. A little bit of my own story is I actually grew up in a Korean American household. My parents immigrated to the United States, to Los Angeles in the 1970s. And one of the things that was customary for a lot of Korean immigrants in the 1970s was to galvanize as a community in churches. It didn't mean that every Korean was a churchgoer or a Christian. It just meant we all went to church because that was the one place where we could eat our food and speak our language and no one would bother us. And so that's what the church became for us. So I grew up going to church and I actually loved it. And in many ways, the kids and the youth ministry leaders that invested in my life, as well as my brother's lives as young people, deeply left a mark on us, which is probably why we're following Jesus today in many ways. But another reason why I loved going to church was because I hated being at home. Home was really awful. It was terrifying. And the reason was because of my father. My dad was a very violent man, very angry man. And so even standing here, like it's really difficult for me to even remember or recollect a memory of him being happy or joyful. So anytime we could be out of the house and away from my dad would be great. Otherwise, I just remember just these tormenting kind of memories of the ways in which he would hurt my mom as well as the three of us boys, or the four of us boys, my three brothers and I. And so like we loved going to church, but I remember actually distinctly, we went to one of the largest immigrant churches in Los Angeles. And, but I remember all of a sudden kind of in late elementary school, this church ended up like 1 week we were going to this church every week. And then the very next week, there was a big group of us that all of a sudden we were going to this other place, also in downtown Los Angeles, but maybe a couple miles away. And like half of the friends that I knew at this old church were not there, and we were all part of this new church. And so I was like, okay, I guess this is cool. Little did I know that what had happened was there was a massive church split. And so later on, I would find out that there was a bunch of conflict between kind of the pastor faction and the elder faction. And so here we were now going to this other church. Now we were in middle school and I was part of this youth ministry there, and that youth ministry ended up making a significant impact on my life. But I remember distinctly going on a Friday night to the Friday night fellowship for youth. But it wasn't only for youth, also the adults would be there and they would be worshiping as well. I remember in Koreatown, I just remember this ominous scene. And like someone asked me if this was true, and I remember this to be true of my memory. I remember there were helicopters flying above, and I remember there was LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, cars like all around this church where we gathered in Koreatown, Los Angeles. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I remember, we end up parking and we go in to the church, and I remember like peeking into the main sanctuary, kind of like a sanctuary like this, peeking in, and I could see LAPD all lined up, holding back a group of people who are about to throw down and get into a massive brawl and fist fight. Now, as a middle schooler, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I was like, this is church? Like, I gotta bring my friends to this show, you know? And turns out it was another massive conflict. This time, again, amongst this pastor's faction and the elder faction. And then there was another church split that happened. I remember after that, a lot of the friends that I grew up with youth group in during those years, they've never gone back to church before. And I just remember like, which church are we gonna go to? At that point, I'm in middle school trying to figure out what's gonna happen. And we're in middle school and my older brothers are in high school. And my father ends up telling us, we're not gonna go to either church. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he says, I'm starting a church. And we were like, whoa, like, what do you mean? He goes, I just graduated from seminary. And we were like, how did that happen? Like, is that, like all of a sudden now you can start a church just like that? That's what happens? And he's like, yes, we're starting a church. Now keep in mind, like my brothers and I, we were incredibly fearful of him still. His behavior hadn't changed that much. So then my dad, though he ends up, apparently he had been going to seminary as well, had graduated from seminary. And so he decides after starting that church, or after that church split, that he was gonna start a church. Now I recognize so many people, they say to me, oh, I get it. You're a Christian today because you grew up going to church. That's why you're a Christian. And that's why you're a pastor today, because your father's a pastor. And I'm like, listen, I'm a Christian today despite growing up in the church sometimes and despite my dad being a pastor. My dad ends up starting a church, and with the 3 other families that he would gather with, that church ends up struggling quite a bit, and he ends up closing the doors of that church. But towards the tail end of that time, he actually wrote a book. And the book that he wrote in Korean, it seems like overnight, that book became a bestseller in Korea. And so, right as my dad was closing the church, my dad started to travel to different places, and he would begin preaching in front of different Korean audiences all over the world. It turns out there are Koreans everywhere. Even in Oklahoma, everyone. I remember him go to Oklahoma, Brazil, and Argentina. And then I remember then we would travel to Korea and we'd go with him and he would preach on some of the largest stages in the world in terms of churches. My dad had all of a sudden become this incredibly well-known, popular author and speaker. When my father had made the move into vocational ministry, he was 40 years old. Today, he's 78 years old. So in 38 years, he's written 40 books now. So my dad, the topic of the first book that he wrote and every subsequent book, the platform by which he would write and speak these 40 books and speak on some of the largest stages in the world is how to raise your family. That reaction you just had, I mean, could you imagine living it? We are like, oh my, like, what is going on? Why are they listening to dad tell them about how to treat mom? Why are they listening to dad about how to raise kids? And so there was this dissonance that continued to perturb me. And I remember going to college, and finally in college, I just remember wrestling like, God, I don't know, based on my experience at church and at home, I don't know if you're the real person that I want to follow. But I remember reading in John chapter 6 and reading about how when he finally says, you remember there's that moment where Jesus gives a harsh teaching after he's fed the 5,000. And then he gives us harsh teaching about eating my flesh and drinking my blood. And he's speaking metaphorically, of course. And all these disciples start to leave after he's fed the 5,000. And Simon Peter, he says to Simon Peter, do you want to go as well? And Simon Peter says, to whom shall I go? You alone have the words of eternal life. And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, as much as I don't want to follow God, as much as I think all of this is so full of hypocrisy, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. So at that point, I make a commitment to go all in with my faith my freshman year at Berkeley. And as I'm studying there, I'm starting to grow in leadership in our Christian fellowship. We helped start a church while we were there. I was involved in crew. Soon I became convinced that I was actually gonna go into vocational ministry myself. By the time I'm a senior, I'm a leader within this church that we had helped start, as well as in crew. And now I'm thinking about vocational ministry and going to seminary and following kind of the footsteps as much as I was surprised myself that I was going down this route. But a couple things happened my senior year. One was my senior year, I remember going to the Urbana Missions Conference. And I remember just being so galvanized at Urbana, came back home during winter break in Los Angeles. And it was right around the time that email was starting to become a thing. And I remember just kind of clicking around, checking email. And there were these messages that I didn't quite recognize. And click, click, click. And immediately, pornographic images just flooded the screen. And I was hooked. And I did what any respectable, devout, rising young Christian leader would do. I told no one. But I kept leading and kept telling people, I want to go into ministry, and started angling for what would happen after I graduated. The second thing that happened was a little bit more kind of trivial, but I remember I was playing intramural softball and my senior year, and I really wanted to win an intramural softball championship. And so I had put together this team full of a lot of different players, both from other kind of places that I knew at Cal. Many of them weren't even Christians. And then there was one person that was a Christian from our church that also joined the team. He really, really wanted to be on the team. So I actually invited him to join our team as well. And as I had him there, I remember as, we're vying for the championship in intramural softball, this one guy who was from our church, I could tell that he was really upset at me for a decision that I had made one game. I had asked him to play a position that he didn't want to play, and I could just tell he was frustrated at me. And meanwhile, the reason why I had him play that position was because the others on the team really thought that he should play that position. Anyhow, so the stress of trying to lead like a team of some sort. So I'm sure you know nothing of that. No, I'm just kidding. And I just remember kind of the stress of that. So I know that this guy's mad at me. So at the end of the game, Murray says, Drew, can we talk? And I'm like, yeah, sure, man. And he's like, we're walking on the field. And he basically says to me, he's like, Drew, I can't believe you made me play catcher. I can't believe you had me play catcher. I was like, man, I'm sorry, man. Listen, I was just trying to balance out kind of who's playing where. And he's just like, man, you're so annoying. And you frustrate me. Like, you're an awful leader, And I'm like, okay, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I made you play catcher. And then he says, you are so full of blankety blank. I'm like, man, his tone and his language started getting even worse. You are so blankety, full of blankety. And he's just ripping into me. And I'm just like, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made you play catcher. I'm just like, I feel like a lamb being led to, I'm just like, as a Christian, I just need to keep saying, I'm sorry. And then some guys finally come up and break up. They're like, yo, man, leave him alone. Like, what's up, dude? We just won the game. Just go home and go to sleep. And I remember going home that night, and I'm an Enneagram 2. Any other Enneagram 2s in the house here? Yes? Wow, just one. So a need to be liked. And so as an Enneagram 2, I was crushed. So I remember just going home that night, and I could not sleep. And I kept recounting all the words he said to me. And one of the things that he said to me was, he said, all these people at church, you think you're some leader at church who wants to be a pastor one day? You don't even know how all the people at church talk behind your back about how full of it you are. Can't even believe you. I remember that just kept ringing in my head. And I was super anxious because the next night I had to go to our college fellowship. And so could you imagine, so I'm going to the college fellowship, and I'm super nervous. I'm gonna see this guy. What's he gonna say to me? What's anyone else gonna say to me? And so I end up going to the fellowship super tense. And I remember seeing him, but he's smiling. And he walks up towards me and he goes, hey, Drew, what's up, man? I'm like, hey, what's up? he goes, hey man, listen, I was pretty angry last night, but hey, I was totally out of line. I'm sorry, we're good, right? We're good? I'm like, yeah, totally, we're good, man. We're good, praise God. But I wasn't good. I was hurt, I was angry, and I was suspicious. And now other people that were friends of his, like I'm starting to like doubt other people. Like I'm like, are you the person that he was referring to when he told me? Are you being genuine with me? Or are you being disingenuous? Like, and so I did what any respectable, young, aspiring Christian leader would do. I moved across the country to New York, all in the name of God, following God. Even though the church that we had helped start, they had asked me to be the college pastor. Little did I realize there was all this unresolved stuff within me. And I happened to land at a church in Elmhurst, Queens, called New Life Fellowship, founded by a guy named Pete Scazzaro. And Pete Scazzaro had been on his own journey. And in Pete Scazzaro's journey, I joined as an intern. Now you gotta understand, I joined this church hoping to learn how to preach, how to serve the poor, how to do incredible ministry for Jesus. And yet, he begins the internship by showing us this iceberg. And he's like, you know, an iceberg, 10% is above the surface, and there's this 90% below the surface. And most evangelical models are models that only address that 10% above the surface. The behaviors that we need to change, the practices that cause us to actually have new habits, but they actually don't end up changing the root issues, that 90%. You know, some of those difficult emotions about what do we do with our anger, with our hurt, with our sadness? What do we do with our anxiety? What do we do when we've got these secret addictions that we keep going to and we're not willing to tell anyone? And for the first time in my life, I'm invited to do a deeper journey that goes beyond read the Bible and pray. Not that these are unimportant, but these are things that end up becoming just surface level if they're not addressing what's happening below the surface. I remember Pete, one of the first exercises he gives is he basically says, hey, draw a picture of your family of origin at the age of 9. And I was like, what kind of heresy is this? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I came to learn how to preach. And yet here I was being invited to this deeper journey. It's possible to do ministry for God without God. And here's the thesis that you've probably heard before when it comes to this. It's that emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. It's not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And here's what I realized. I realized that I was so judgmental against my dad. What a hypocrite. I can't believe he would do this. How dare he be this flamboyant person on stage and at home be someone entirely different? And it would take me years in my own personal journey to realize I was simply perpetuating with the hidden addictions that I was carrying, with the ways that I would stuff feelings of anger and sadness, and yet it would leak out of me. I realized I was simply doing the same thing that I saw my dad do. Now this thesis, emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. What that means is it does not matter how big the church I lead is, how wonderful my preaching is, how many books I've written, how many degrees I have. At the end of the day, I might have all of that. But I've got this anger issue that keeps tripping me up as well as my staff team. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much of the scriptures I've memorized. If that anger issue keeps flaring up below the surface of my life, then at the end of the day, I'm really not that spiritually mature. I might be someone who's memorized scores of scripture, can recite them on demand, have prayed and pray in a prayer room for hours on end. And yet, at the end of the day, I'm incredibly defensive with my spouse. And it's hard for me just to be present with my spouse and to listen to her. It doesn't matter if I have a PhD in Old Testament I'm really not that spiritually mature. And that was such a revolution for my own life. What does it mean to begin to integrate every part of myself and to allow God into the deeper journey, not only a one-time thing, but a constant thing? And that's one of the hardest aspects of ministry, because it's easy to do ministry for God without God. Another thing that kind of ended up transforming my life was I mentioned that my immigrant parents, they worked incredibly hard. My mom worked the graveyard shift, just making ends meet. You gotta understand, the Korean heritage, especially Korean immigrants in the 70s, we were coming from a war-torn country that before it was a war-torn country, it had been occupied by Japan. So you gotta understand, within the psyche of the Korean people then, the people that immigrated here in the 70s, Koreans, in my heritage, in my bones, is basically this message that my parents, they came here and they're like, listen, there is no plan B. You are our retirement. We came here with no other options. We left home and country to be in a foreign land so that you could make it the next generation. That was the dream. And my parents would constantly tell me, listen, our dream is that you would make it to Harvard. Now, some of you are like, I thought that was a stereotype. Listen, it was true for us. That you would make it to Harvard. That was the dream. And none of us made it. But it was this go. You got to prove yourself. Prove that you belong. Prove that you can speak the language. Prove to all these white people that you can make, that you belong here. So you got to understand, this go, this. So my mom, she worked the graveyard shift growing up. My earliest memories are her wearing scrubs at night after dinner, and then basically going off somewhere, coming back in as we were kind of waking up, and to make us breakfast, she would come in with her scrubs from working as a registered nurse. Rinse and repeat. My father, like I mentioned, at the age of 40, after he had worked 3 different jobs while going to seminary, he had also, when he makes this shift into vocational ministry, like I said, he's written 40 books in 38 years. So my dad's always like, he's like, you're 46 now. You know how many books I wrote by the time I was 46? And I got started later than you did. Yeah, I just want you to know, this tidal wave of go, you got to prove yourself, that is so in me. I remember one of our first family vacations growing up was a missions trip to an orphanage in Mexico. I was like, this is what vacations are, wow. So I just want you to, so there was this immigrant, you need to prove yourself, go, work and produce. You are what you do, that's in me. And I realized, after I was at New Life Fellowship, I knew I wanted to go to seminary. And I loved the church so much in New York City that I decided to go to seminary up at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary up in the greater Massachusetts, Boston area. But I loved the church so much in New York City, what I would do is I would ride the Fenghua bus, the Chinatown bus from Chinatown, Boston to Chinatown, New York to get back to New York, work on the weekends at New Life Fellowship, hop on the Chinatown bus from New York all the way back to Chinatown, Boston, hop on the T, then to the commuter rail, take the commuter rail out to Hamilton, Massachusetts on Sunday night. And then I would take a full load of graduate school classes at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and work as a janitor just so I could make ends meet. Now, some of you are like, that sounds emotionally unhealthy. Yes, it was. Like I said, my name is Drew, and I'm a workaholic. And one of the things that we realized at New Life Fellowship, it was a year after graduating from seminary when I was burnt out at the age of 25. And I remember Pete being like, you're 25 years old. And I'm like, I know, but I feel like toast. And I remember it was then that we realized there was another aspect that we wanted to get at. More than just doing the deeper journey around emotional health, we realized, first we would often say this phrase, Jesus may live in your heart, but grandpa lives in your bones. So I might say, Jesus is in my heart. I've been set free. But honestly, the way that I work and the way that I treat people looks more like Grandpa Hyun than it does like Jesus. The way that I'm parenting my teenager, I might say, I follow Jesus, I love Jesus. And at the end of the day, the way that I smother my teenager or react to him when he says something back to me, it can often feel more like Papa Hyun than it does like Jesus. Jesus may live in your heart, but Grandpa lives in your bones. And I realized, oh my goodness, I need a way to unlearn this tidal, there's this tidal wave of pressure that comes from the immigrant hustle, from the city that I live in, of New York, the city that never sleeps, as well as from Christian culture that tells me you are what you do, you are what you produce. A.J. Swoboda, in his book, Subversive Sabbath, he has this phrase where he says, keeping the Sabbath, the 24-hour Sabbath, it's the one commandment of the 10 commandments, right up there with thou shalt not have no other gods before me, thou shalt not murder. It's the one commandment that if you keep it, you might get fired from your church. What does that say about the culture of the churches that we come from? Now, believe me, I love the Protestant kind of movement. And yet there's something about our own shadows related to the workaholism, the drive, the numbers, the metrics of what is success, and that sort of thing. So that's where we basically came to this conclusion. It's not only emotional health, which is defined as our ability to be self-aware and to love well, but it's also contemplative spirituality, a slowing down to cultivate a rich, obedient relationship with Jesus. When brought together, these things offer nothing short of a spiritual revolution in our lives. One of the things that we often say at Emotionally Healthy Discipleship is this: as a leader, you cannot give what you do not possess. And too many of us end up trying to give out of an emptiness. We try to give out of something that we don't have. We're still running on fumes, and we're not attached to the vine. Instead, we're attached to yesteryear's experiences with God, or a spirit that's or a schedule that's run haggard, or a way of doing ministry that's on autopilot. At the end of the day, as leaders, we can only give what we possess. One of the passages that I love, of course, is this one. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, you and I know, you've probably preached on this before. It doesn't mean that following Jesus means that you're suffering free. It simply means that through every season, if you follow his yoke, if you put on his yoke, there's a way in which his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And really the invitation of us, especially these next few days, is whose yoke are you carrying? What's some of the 90%, the iceberg below that these next few days that God wants to address? What are the parts of you that have been going at an unsustainable pace? And what you model to the world and to everyone else is a harried, frenetic life that is so apart from God. So here's what I would love to do. I'd love for us, at this point, we're gonna pass out just a handout right now. And here's what I would love to do. I would love to, in Pete's book, Emotionally Healthy Leader, he actually outlines the 4 marks of the inner life of an emotionally healthy leader, as well as the 4 marks of the outer life of an emotionally healthy leader. And I would love for us, just what we're gonna do in this time is just to take a little bit of inventory for yourself. The first mark is to face your shadow. And what I mean by face your shadow is to face those parts of yourself tonight. Is it a hidden addiction? Is it where kind of anger has crept in a bit, or bitterness or cynicism? Is it a woundedness that hasn't quite been healed, but has continued to fester? Or maybe you don't even know what your shadow is. Ask your spouse. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that tonight, but to face your shadow and to just come correct before God. I mean, all of us are pastors and ministry leaders in different ways, so we all know the experience of doing ministry for God without God. So is the invitation tonight to face your shadow? Or number 2, to lead out of your marriage or your singleness. And what that means is, if you're married, that's your first ambition. The mega mystery that Paul talks about in Ephesians 5. That, you know, when I was growing up and what I witnessed was basically it was God, then church, then kids, then your spouse, you know, like that was kind of the order. But what if the mega mystery, the way that your greatest witness to your church and to the world, if you're married, is your marriage? Because that's what Paul is talking about. The mega mystery, the only time that Paul talks about, he uses the phrase mega mystery is there in Ephesians 5. It talks about, in other words, it's a sign and a wonder. And maybe you have been neglecting, if you're married, your marriage. But what does it mean to lead out of your marriage? That without a shadow of a doubt, that my wife Tina, she knows that I am not called, well, yes, I'm called to my church and the vocation that I'm in, but I'm not called first. I haven't made a vow. I've made a vow to one person. And Tina knows that she is my first ambition, and that above and beyond any ambition, she is my first ambition. And if you're single here, what a beautiful vocation of singleness, to lead out of your singleness. Most of the history of the church is replete with what does it mean to be wholehearted in your singleness and to cultivate meaningful community as a sign of God's love that you can experience here on earth, that you yourself could experience the love of God in such a significant way. What does it mean for us to do that? Maybe that's the invitation for you. Or number 3, to slow down for loving union. You realize that you are at an unsustainable pace and you are tired. I'm so prone, and you know, people have asked me, oh, you're the president of Emotional Healthy Discipleship, and I say, I know. And I often say, you know what qualifies me to be the president of Emotional Healthy Discipleship is I realize how emotionally unhealthy I am. That's why I'm constantly trying to face these very things. And number 4 is to practice Sabbath delight. If you don't do this already, but to practice a 24-hour period in which you get to experience the gospel, the good news of Jesus, that you don't have to do or perform. You can just enjoy and stop and rest and contemplate. It's the most practical way that you experience the gospel. The gospel being, you don't have to earn it. I mean, what an incredible gift. So many of us, we preach gospel, we preach grace, and then we're like, no, I've been freed by grace to be a slave to workaholism. And God's like, no, you got it wrong. You've been freed to take a Sabbath, to rest and be loved. The outer life of an emotionally healthy leader, planning and decision-making, culture and team building, power and wise boundaries, endings and new beginnings. It was beautiful hearing Mike earlier talk about just succession and just what an incredible, but here's what I would love for you to do. Just, I'm gonna put up this question here, and I'm gonna give you just a moment, just each one of us, just to reflect on our own, to take a little bit of inventory. Here are some of the questions that I'm gonna invite you to reflect on. What thoughts, questions, or feelings come to mind in session 1, this first session here? What are the unique challenges of ministry life that make emotionally healthy discipleship difficult or easy? Now again, when it comes to these questions or aspects, I'm talking about emotional health, going beneath the surface, facing your shadow, even like dealing with some things like grief and loss and dark nights of the soul. And as well as slowing down for loving union. Friends, someone said to me, they were part of a growing church in Southern California, and they said to me, I have not met one founding pastor who loves being a pastor in ministry. And my buddy and I, who we both are founding pastors of churches in New York City, and we both have been dramatically changed by emotional healthy discipleship, we kind of looked at each other kind of like, we kind of love it. And both of us have been in it as founding pastors for the last 10 to 15 years. And we were just like, wow, what a predicament. And we said to the person, he was driving with another friend who was up front, and we said, oh, we're both founding pastors, and we both love, and I said, I can only speak for myself. And then my friend Jordan, he was like, I can speak for myself, and I actually love it. I love doing ministry. I love being a pastor. Yeah, it's hard, but I love it. And he was just like flabbergasted. He was like, no way, this can't be true. I can't believe it. And I'm like, no, listen, it can be done. But it definitely takes some intentionality and hard work. But what are some of the unique challenges that make it difficult right now for you? And then review the list of the following marks of the inner life of a leader and the outer life of a leader. Circle the one or two that God might be inviting you to focus on during this season of your life. Just as you think about your ministry context right now, why don't you just circle one or two, all right? So I'm just gonna give you a moment. We're just gonna give you some personal time, maybe for the next 10 minutes or so. And then we're gonna get into small groups and just have a little discussion about what God might be percolating in your heart, okay? So we'll give you about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll bring you back. going to give you, there's 5 more minutes, but I also wanted to invite you. There's also, I realize, we'll just go straight to this. There's an inventory also in the handouts. And the inventory is basically use the following symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality. Get an idea of where you are right now and write down the number, right? 5, always true of me, frequently true of me, occasionally true, for these 10 different things. And I'm actually going to give you some time to reflect on these 10 different things as well. Sorry. For instance, I compare myself a lot to other people. I often say yes when I prefer to say no. That one's true of me. I often don't speak up to avoid the disapproval of others. People close to me would describe me as defensive and easily offended. I have a hard time laughing at my shortcomings and failures. I avoid looking weak or foolish in social situations. I'm not always the person I appear to be. I struggle with taking risks because I could fail or look foolish. My sense of worth or well-being comes from what I have, what I do, or what others think of me. I often act like a different person when in different situations and with different people. So you can also just spend some time doing a little inventory here as well, okay? And you have about 6 more minutes, so you can start working on this inventory if you'd like. Okay, here's what I'd love to invite you to do. We're gonna break up into groups of 2 to 3. Just turn to someone next to you or, and would just love, you could either answer these questions or you can just share, what are you beginning to realize about yourself after kind of tonight's presentation? What are you beginning to realize? Or you could follow this guide with these questions here. So feel free to get into groups of 2 to 3 and just share what's God percolating in your own heart this evening. You're gonna have about 15 minutes, everyone, 15 minutes, okay? All right, you got about 1 more minute, friends, 1 more minute. All right. All right, friends. Can you turn to your group and just say, thanks for sharing? Can you do that real quick? And you can also say, thanks for listening. Can you do that real quick? Hey, we'd just love to hear if you're up for it as a large group. I know I had an extraordinary conversation with Craig a little bit earlier. Would anyone care to share? And you could just use the sentence stem, I'm beginning to realize about myself. What I'm beginning to realize about myself is, and you can just share. Would anyone care to just raise your hand and share? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Jeff. I'm beginning to learn about myself and what is taught here, that these things are never really completely learned and practiced on this side of glory, that I think we make, by the Holy Spirit's help, a little bit of gradual progress in each, but they're never really completely done.
Yeah. Progress, not perfection. One of the things, Scott McKnight, he writes about how, he said, in the encounters with Jesus, people typically change when either there's a crisis or a quest. And I found that to be true in my own life. Now, hopefully you're not coming into this room with a crisis, but I recognize some of us are in a crisis. But hopefully we can mitigate against some of these crises by hopefully taking the call of this lifelong journey of being on this quest. And what ends up happening is, I think, especially as pastors and leaders, is I kind of discontinue the quest of being with Jesus. And yet, it's this growing, evolving journey I know that each of us are invited to. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else beginning to realize about yourself?
Just going over these questions, I'm starting to realize that I need to take an inventory of myself on a daily basis to keep my attitude, my behavior, and in my thinking, because sometimes we minimize what we think sometimes. And so for me, when I was going through, as I took it out as an inventory, I'm like, most of the questions I answered like 2 and 1, and 1 was like 5. And it made me really look at how I can have a self-righteous anger.
Wow.
And not be more compassionate when I need to be.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, the need to take inventory regularly. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much.
We all have our hang-ups and we all have our struggles and that sort of thing. And a friend of mine said a long time ago, Ross Slaughter has a lot to be humble about. I was looking at the diagnostic and I'm going, really over the last decade, I've done a lot of healing. And I really didn't know that until just now. 10 years ago, I would have answered these questions very, very differently.
It's amazing. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's helped me realize that I can be kind of hypocritical sometimes, like telling other people what the Bible says we should do and how we should act, but then realize that I'm often very impatient and ungrateful. So mean, I guess recognizing that is the first step.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah. Yeah, recognizing is the first step. Anyone else? What are you beginning to realize about yourself? Yeah.
I was beginning to sorry, my name's Oscar. I was starting to realize that it does seem that this was exactly what I needed to hear, particularly just the last few days. I'd been kind of thinking, gosh, I feel like I'm hitting the wall in my sanctification and my relationship with Christ and all of the issues I'm dealing with. You know, and you look at self-help books, you start all these things, and I was like, but have I tried Jesus? And I just wasn't even like thinking about that. And then I come in here and you're like, have you thought of Jesus? And I'm like, I guess not really, in a sense. But so that's been pretty cool.
Thanks, Oscar. Love it. Thank you. Anyone else begin to realize?
My name is Kitty, and I'm a spouse of and a preacher's kid and a grandfather's, I'm like, whatever. But I have come to realize that shame is not the boss of me.
Wow.
We had a friend from the neighborhood. I've been watching her dog, and she came over. She made a quilt for me for watching her dog, for going over and taking her dog out. And so she came over last night. We were in our backyard, and we have so many dandelions. And I was just dying. Isn't that crazy? I was so ashamed of my yard, the dandelions. And here's this wonderful person who made a quilt for me. Wow. I need to get Jesus is the boss of me, but shame is not the boss of me.
Amen. Wow, Kitty, thank you. Thank you. What a thing to realize. And where does that shame come from? Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? What are you beginning to realize about yourself? Yeah.
I've been realizing that I'm growing and that these questions were great because, I used to do this a lot. But look what I've just been doing recently. And that is really an encouragement. I'm still not, at a 1 or whatever never is. But we get to keep growing. And that's, to me, a word of grace. And I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. What was your name?
Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Oh, there's one hand back there. Thanks, Mike.
I can go. I'm Jackson. And it was your first question, the first one about, I realized that there's this verse that keeps speaking to me, and it's, apart from me, you can do nothing. And that has been such a challenge to me my whole time in ministry. Because there's this real temptation to white knuckle. And it's just the sense of wonder that keeps me coming back to God. If I release, I really want to see what you can do.
Yeah.
Instead. I know that, but the reality is different. So anyway, I appreciate that.
Thanks, Jackson. Yeah. Yeah. There's something embedded within the Christian evangelical tradition of just, it's not only the Christian evangelical, it's just the metrics of success, and in the Western world too, that somehow can get us in a weird way, they're meant as KPIs to keep us on mission, and yet somehow they can often cause us to lose sight of the real mission, which is to be with Jesus so that we could do things for Jesus. And we're actually in the process, Pete's writing a new book called Emotionally Healthy Success. And gosh, there's so many thoughts I could give about some of the, and we're convening a gathering. We're in the process of starting kind of these pastor cohorts to hopefully keep us on track to have the main thing become the main thing. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm beginning to realize how fabulous an example of servant ministry is when the executive director is the mic runner.
That's right. Mike, thank you for embodying that so much.
I don't like to draw attention to myself, but I do a pretty good job. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mike Runner, Mike McClenahan.
Thank you, Mike. What a gift, huh?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Bruce, for that comment. Well, friends, I wanted to thank you all for sharing and for reflecting. And we're all on the journey. And gosh, ministry is so hard. And I was part of a group that was convened by this one foundation, and they shared these statistics of how people in ministry, they showed a statistic of how many people who went into ministry, or how many people in the normal population are victims of sexual and physical abuse as kids, and whatever that percentage was, and then how many percentage of ministry people, caretakers who are in vocational ministry, have also been victims of abuse in various ways. And it was like 30% more than the normal population. She was convening, she was the head of this foundation, she was sharing with us that like what she's noticed is that, so many of us, we're drawn to this. Because we want people to experience healing. There's something that disproportionately how ministers and caretakers, we often come from just a lot of pain. And one of the conversations that we were having in this group, the reason why it was convened was how can pastors then, who are prone already to having backgrounds of hurt and pain, and we get so lost in helping other people, and some of us end up drowning in the midst of it. And it doesn't have to be this way. So thank you for taking time to be in places like the fellowship community, and the fact that you keep showing up, friends. Like, we need each other. So I just wanted to, just as we land the plane, if possible, just share some resources that we have. These assessments, you're probably like, oh, another assessment. Here's an assessment that you can take that's very similar to the one that you took, and then you can hear more about the different resources if you'd like to take this assessment. We exist as an organization to revolutionize the church through a slowed down spirituality and a discipleship that goes beneath the surface. And we are specifically invested in the lives of pastors and leaders because we firmly believe that as goes the leader, so goes the church. The culture of a church will not change. You could run a course, but really, and you all know this, right? Like, I could be someone who, I'm running the course, I know the language of emotional health, and yet be incredibly unhealthy in the way that and manner in which I lead and in which I'm following Jesus. And so what does it look like? And so we as an organization, we want to come alongside pastors and leaders like you. And let's see, I'm gonna go to just a couple of quick options. That's a book I wrote that I think some of you are getting a copy of but let's see. We have something called the School of Emotionally Healthy Leadership, specifically for pastors and leaders. Before that QR code, let me just go ahead and go back here. We actually have a discipleship course. The first part of the course is an 8-week course called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And it goes over things like, emotionally unhealthy spirituality, living out of your true self, out of your gospel-centered kind of self in Jesus. Going back in order to go forward. Grief and loss, how to deal with grief and loss. How to encounter and go through the wall or the dark night of the soul that St. John of the Cross talks about and the other kind of ancient spiritual writers. How to grow into an emotionally healthy adult. How to begin the practice of daily office and Sabbath keeping so that I could, Jackson, you were mentioning, how do I keep following Jesus? How do I build rhythms into my life where my life is Jesus? So that what I give to people is not some technique or some like pithy kind of sermon, but I give people who I am, a presence that has been with Jesus. And then growing into an emotionally mature adult. And then we're gonna talk about a rule of life tomorrow. But we also have a course, the second part of the Emotional Healthy Discipleship course is called Emotional Healthy Relationships. And we were just talking earlier, Craig, about like emotional healthy relationship. What are some skills for how do we live out Ephesians 4 in our churches? How do we begin to use language where we're both truthful and loving together? How we can actually begin to be a safe presence with other people. What are some skills that we learn about how to navigate and negotiate conflict in an Ephesians 4 way? That's all part of the part 2 of the course. But if you'd like to get started, there's a course or there's this school specifically for pastors and leaders that happens every fall and spring. And I would love, if you're interested in that, the School of Emotional Healthy Leadership, it's an 8-week course in the fall, and it's a deep dive for leaders to grow. Part 2, the relationship skills will be the ones that we're actually introducing you to this fall. So, hey, with that said, thank you. Looking forward to tomorrow, everyone. I believe the Rule of Life handout was already handed out. That's gonna be for tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that, actually. So thank you all. And Mike, thanks for running the mic. What an incredible model. So, yeah.